Let me tell you something that nobody in the financial industry wants you to hear. Because if you hear it and you act on it, they lose money. I'm going to tell you anyway. I've been sitting in the same office in Omaha for over 60 years. Same desk, same chair, same view out the same window. And in that time, I watched thousands of people do everything right. They saved their money, they worked hard, they followed the plan, they had 55 or 60 or 65 and they retired. And then quietly, slowly, almost invisibly, they began to die. Not physically, not right away, but something essential inside them. Switched off like a machine that was built to run and was suddenly told to stop. And I do not mean they were lazy or ungrateful. I mean the trap got them and nobody warned them. It was coming. The retirement trap is not about running out of money. Every advisor in every office, in every city will warn you about running out of money that is their product, that is their fear. And they sell it well, but the real trap has nothing to do with your portfolio. The real trap is what happens to your identity, your purpose, your cognitive engine when you remove the thing that was organizing your entire existence and replace it with freedom, because here is the brutal truth about freedom: most people cannot handle it. They have never practiced it. They spent 40 years being told where to be and when to be there, and then one morning they wake up and there is nothing on the calendar, and that blank calendar feels like liberation for about 6 weeks, and then it starts to feel like a prison with no walls and no guards and no sentence, just endless open days that nobody needs anything from you. And I have watched strong men crumble inside that prison. I have watched brilliant women disappear into it, and I made a decision very early in my life that I was never going to let that happen to me. Today, I'm going to tell you what I learned. I'm going to give you 5 traps, 5 specific traps that are waiting for you after 55. And more importantly, I'm going to tell you how to avoid every single one of them before they cost you the most valuable thing you have left, which is not your money. Pay very close attention. I call these the 5 silent traps. They are silent because they do not announce themselves. They do not show up on a balance sheet or a blood test. They move in slowly the way fog moves in over a harbor. And by the time you realize the fog is there, you cannot see the shore anymore. I want to be direct with you before we begin. These ideas are not complicated. A 12-year-old could understand every single one of them, but understanding them and living them, they were completely different things. Most people who watch this will nod along. They will say, yes, that makes sense. Yes, I see that. And then they will do nothing. And 5 years from now, they will be sitting in the fog wondering how they got there. I am not talking to those people today. I am talking to the rare person who hears a truth and immediately asks, what do I do about this? If that is you, then let us begin. Sick tip. Trap 1, the identity. Collapsy, I want you to think about something for the last 30 or 40 years. If someone asked you who you are or what did, you say you probably said your job. I am an engineer. I am a teacher. I am a manager. I am a doctor. You did not mean to make your career your identity. It just happened the same way. Compound interest happens slowly, then suddenly, and here is the brutal truth that nobody tells you before you retire: when you remove that job, you do not just lose a schedule, you lose the answer to the question of who you are. And that question does not stop being asked. Your brain keeps asking it every morning when you wake up, every time someone at a dinner party says so. What do you do every time you look in the mirror and feel the particular hollow feeling of a person who used to be somewhere important and is now nowhere in particular? I call this the identity collapse. And it is the first trap because it hits first, usually within 90 days of retirement. And it is the engine that drives every other trap on this. Let me tell you about a man I knew, and we'll call him Robert. Robert was a surgeon. Brilliant man, spent 35 years doing what very few people on earth can do. He saved lives with his hands. He was somebody everybody in the room knew it when he walked in. He retired at 63 because his wife wanted to travel. They bought the house in Florida. They went to Europe twice, and by the time he was 65, Robert had lost 15 pounds. He did not need to lose. He was drinking more than he should. And his wife told me quietly at a dinner that he had become someone she did not recognize. Not mean, not dangerous, just gone. The lights were on, but nobody was home. Robert had confused his skill with his identity, and when the skill had no arena to perform in anymore, he did not know who he was. Compare that to my friend Paul Volcker. You know, Paul was working into his 90s, not because he needed the money, because his work was not separate from who he was. It was the expression of who he was. And he understood that the goal was never to stop expressing yourself. The goal was to find work that felt so aligned with your nature that stopping it would be like stopping breathing. Here is your assignment for this trap. Tonight, I want you to take a piece of paper, and at the top, I want you to write, "Who am I without my job title?" And then I want you to write for 20 minutes without stopping, no editing, no judgment. Just write what you love, what you believe, what you would fight for, what you would do if nobody was watching. And nobody was paying. That piece of paper is the beginning of your post-retirement identity. And if you cannot fill that page, I am telling you right now, you are not ready to retire yet, regardless of what your financial advisor says. Trap 2. The cognite withdrawal. Here is a number I want you to remember. It is the number 13. Researchers at Princeton studied what happens to the human brain under conditions of financial stress and cognitive disengagement. And they found that when the brain loses its primary challenge, its primary source of engagement and problem solving, it begins to atrophy in measurable ways. The effect is equivalent to losing 13 IQ points. 13 points, that is not nothing. That is the difference between sharp and slow, between catching the nuance and missing it entirely, between being dangerous in a conversation and becoming the person other people quietly steer around. I call this the cognitive withdrawal, and it works exactly like any other withdrawal. Your brain has been running at high intensity for decades, solving problems, meeting deadlines, navigating complexity, managing people, and all of that activity was like exercise for your most important muscle. And then one day you stop, you wake up, you have no meetings, no decisions, no problems to solve, and the brain says, fine, and it begins the downshift, and the downshift feels comfortable at first, like finally taking off tight shoes after a long walk, but after a few months, the comfort becomes fog, and after a few years, the fog becomes something harder to reverse. I have seen this in people with extraordinary minds, men and women who built companies, wrote legislation, led armies, sitting in beautiful homes in beautiful cities, struggling to remember the word they are looking for, struggling to follow a complex argument, struggling in ways that terrify them, but that they cannot talk about because their whole identity was built on being sharp. And I want to tell you something as clearly as I can. The brain is not a savings account. You cannot deposit intelligence and then withdraw it whenever you feel like it. The brain is a muscle. You either use it or you lose it. And the tragedy is that the people who most need to hear this are the ones who built the most powerful minds of their generation, because they assume their mind is permanent. They assume the sharpness they earned will just stay. It does not stay. You have to keep earning it every single day. Charlie Munger was reading 400 pages a week into his 90s, not because he had to, because he understood this trap. Viscerally, he understood that the moment you stop feeding the machine begins to eat itself. Here is your assignment. I want you to identify what I call your cognitive anchor. One subject, one domain, one problem space that you will commit to engaging with deeply and consistently after you retire. Not passively, not watching documentaries on the couch. Actively reading, writing, teaching, debating, building. You need a problem that does not have a solution yet, because a solved problem requires no thinking, and it is unsolved problems that keep the engine running. Find your unsolved problem and never let it go. Trap 3. The Wallandar. I want to paint you a picture. Imagine you have worked your entire life for the moment when you have nothing you have to do, no alarm clock, no commute, no meetings, no deadlines, just time, endless, beautiful open time. Now imagine that within 6 months, that time has become your greatest source of anxiety. This is what I call the hollow calendar. And it is the third trap, and in many ways the most insidious, because it uses the thing you work for to destroy you. Here is what nobody tells you about unstructured time. Human beings are not built for it. I do not mean this as a criticism. I mean it is biology. Our nervous systems evolved under conditions of scarcity and challenge and social obligation. We were built to hunt and build and solve and contribute. We were not built to drift. And when you give a human being who has been highly structured for 40 years a completely unstructured existence, something goes wrong at a very deep level. The brain starts manufacturing urgency. It starts creating anxiety where there was none. It starts picking fights with the people closest to you, because at least conflict is engagement. At least conflict is engagement. At least conflict means something is happening. Watch this happen in my own circle. A man I will not name, who built one of the most successful businesses in his state, retired at 62 with more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. Within 2 years, his marriage of 31 years was over. Not because of infidelity, not because of money, because he had no structure, no purpose, no forward motion, and without forward motion he became reactive. Every small irritation became enormous. Every petty grievance became a crusade, because those petty grievances were the only thing making him feel like something mattered. The hollow calendar does not announce itself as a psychological crisis. It announces itself as boredom, and boredom is what unhappy people call the absence of meaning. Let me give you the mathematical framing here. A typical retirement at 65 lasts approximately 20 years. 20 years is approximately 7,300 days, 7,300 mornings of waking up with no external structure. No one telling you where to be, no deadline organizing your hours. You must replace that structure yourself, deliberately, architecturally, the way a builder designs a house before laying the first stone, or you will drift. And drifting for 20 years is not retirement. It is a very slow and very comfortable kind of dying. Here is your assignment. I want you to design what I call your retirement architecture before you retire. Not before 12 months before you leave your career. I want you to have a written weekly template. What are you doing Monday morning at 9 a.m.? What are you doing Thursday afternoon? What obligations do you have to other people? What does your body need? What does your body need? What does your spirit need? And I want at least 40% of that template to serve someone other than yourself. Because here is what I have learned in 90 plus years. The fastest way to fill a hollow calendar is to give your time to something that needs it. Service is the antidote to drift. Trap for the financial recklessness, reversal. Now we're going to talk about money, and I want to say something before I do. Most retirement financial advice is built on a lie. The lie is that the only financial risk after retirement is spending too much, and the advice industry has done an extraordinary job of making you terrified of this risk. They show you the charts they run, the projections they tell you about sequence of returns, risk and longevity risk and inflation risk, and all of that is real and all of that matters, but nobody talks about the equal and opposite risk, which is spending too little. I call this the financial recklessness reversal. And it is a trap that catches two different kinds of people in two completely opposite ways. Let me explain both. The first version of this trap is the person who accumulated well and saved well, and then in retirement continues to save, continues to pinch, continues to delay, continues to treat money as the goal, rather than the tool. I have met people in their 80s with seven-figure portfolios who have never taken a meaningful trip, who have never bought the thing they wanted, who have never written the check to the cause they believed in, because the psychological programming of accumulation is so deep that it never switches off. And these people reach the end and they realize with a horror that is very quiet and very private that they spent their whole life building a fortress they never lived in. They were so busy defending the money that they forgot to use it. The money outlived the meaning. The second version of this trap is the opposite. It is the person who retires, and suddenly, after a lifetime of discipline, the restraint breaks because the pressure is gone and the identity is shaky and the calendar is hollow and the brain goes looking for stimulation, and it finds it in spending new car, new boat, new kitchen, new trip. And I understand it's impulse, I genuinely do. There is a psychological trap I call the reward trap after decades of sacrifice. The brain says, we earned this. We deprived ourselves. We worked hard. We delayed gratification. Now it is time. And the brain is not wrong that you earned something. It is wrong about what you earned. You earned freedom, not recklessness. You earned choice, not consumption. Here is the mathematical reality that you need to tattoo somewhere visible. If you retire at 65 with $1 million and you draw it down at 5% annually, you have $50,000 a year before taxes. And before any investment grows, if inflation runs at even 3% annually, your purchasing power is cut in half. In 24 years and 24 years from 65 is 89, which is not an unlikely age anymore. This is not a hypothetical. This is arithmetic, and arithmetic does not care about your feelings. Your assignment here is what I call the permission ledger. I want you to create two columns. On the left, I want you to write the things your money is for, not abstract things like security and freedom. Specific things, the trip to Japan you have been talking about for 20 years, your grandchildren's education, the gift to the institution that shaped your life, the medical upgrade that makes your daily existence better. On the right, I want you to write the things your money is not, for the status signals, the purchases designed to impress people who do not care about you, the consumption that substitutes for meaning. Because here's the brutal truth about money: after 55, every dollar you spend on the right column is a dollar working for your actual life. Every dollar you spend on the wrong column is a dollar you worked a week to earn and spend in a moment of confusion about what you actually want. Trap 5, the relationship regression. I have saved this one for last because it is the most important and because I want you to be paying maximum attention when I say it. Everything I have told you so far today is important. The identity, the cognition, the structure, the money, all important. But this last trap is the one that determines the actual quality of whatever time you have left, and it is the one that almost nobody addresses because it is the most uncomfortable. I call it the relationship recession. And here is how it works. For 40 years, your professional life provided you with a social ecosystem. You never had to build yourself colleagues, collaborators, rivals, mentors, people who challenged you, people who damaged you, people who needed you, people who called you for your expertise, people who made you feel relevant. And when you retire, you do not just lose a job, you lose an entire social world almost overnight. And unless you have built something independent of that professional world, something with real roots, real depth, real mutual investment, you're going to find yourself socially impoverished in ways that are medically dangerous. I am not speaking loosely when I say medically dangerous. The research on this is some of the most striking data I have encountered in decades. Social isolation in retirement increases the risk of cognitive decline by approximately 50%. It is associated with elevated cortisol, chronic inflammation, and dramatically shorter life expectancy. The Harvard study of adult development, which tracked individuals for over 80 years, found that the single greatest predictor of health and happiness in later life was not wealth, not even genetics, it was the quality of close relationships. One more time. The single greatest predictor of health and happiness in later life was the quality of close relationships, not your 401k, not your portfolio allocation, not your supplemental Medicare coverage. The people in your life. And here is the brutal part. Most men in particular arrive at retirement having made a systematic and nearly unconscious investment mistake. For decades, they have been neglecting their relationship portfolio while obsessively managing their financial portfolio. They have missed birthdays and anniversaries and recitals and dinner parties because the meeting was important, because the deal was closing, because the numbers needed to work, and they told themselves, I will make up for it later. I will have time later, and now it is later. And the friendships they let go dormant for 10 years do not come back the way you think they will. People moved on, people made new friends. People built lives that do not have a slot for someone who disappeared for a decade. And the marriage that survived the working years, the marriage where two people were so busy building separate professional lives that they forgot to build a shared personal life, that marriage is about to be tested in ways neither person anticipated, because now you are home all the time, in the same house with no buffer of professional distance, and the things you were too busy to address for 30 years are standing in the kitchen waiting for you. I have watched beautiful, long marriages collapse in the first 2 years of retirement, not because of money, not because of infidelity, but because two people who loved each other had never learned how to spend sustained time together, never developed the shared rhythms, the shared projects, the shared meaning that long-term presence requires. And they discovered this too late. Here's the thing about relationships that I have come to understand with deep certainty. Over a very long life, they are not passive. They do not maintain themselves. They require the same deliberate attention that a good business requires. You have to invest in them regularly. You have to show up even when it is not convenient. You have to be willing to be vulnerable, to admit what you need, and ask what others need. And you have to start doing this before retirement. Not after, because the relationship capital you build before you retire is the capital that funds your life after you retire. And unlike financial capital, it cannot be borrowed. It cannot be created quickly. It takes years of deposits before you can make a meaningful withdrawal. I want to tell you about two men. I will call them Henry and George, both retired at 65. Both healthy, both financially comfortable. Henry had spent 30 years building what I call an inner circle, not a large circle. 5 or 6 people he had invested in deeply and consistently. He called them on their birthdays. He knew the names of their children who showed up when things got hard. When Henry retired, he had a life waiting for him, dinners and projects and conversations, and the particular warmth of people who genuinely know you. George had spent 30 years building a professional network, hundreds of contacts. LinkedIn connections, business relationships. When George retired, his phone went quiet almost immediately. Because those relationships were transactional, they were organized around what each person could do for the other professionally. And when the professional context disappeared, so did the relationships. George was not a bad person. He was just a person who had made an accounting error. He had confused a contact list for a community. Your assignment for this trap is the one I consider most urgent. I want you to identify your 5 people who matter most to you outside of your professional life, and I want you to ask yourself honestly, when did I last invest in this relationship genuinely, with no agenda? And if the answer is more than 3 months ago, I want you to reach out today, not next week, today, because the compound interest on relationships works exactly like financial compound interest. The earlier you invest, the greater the return, and the longer you wait, the harder it is to recover lost ground. Now I need to shift, because everything I've told you so far has been tactical, and the last thing I want to say to you is not tactical. It is something that took me a long time to learn, and that I would give almost anything to have learned earlier. I want you to imagine something with me. I want you to imagine you're 90 years old. You're sitting in a chair, maybe it is a comfortable chair in a warm room, and you're looking back over your life. Not the financial summary of your life, the actual life, the mornings and the evenings and the moments that mattered, the conversations that changed you, the people who loved you and the people you loved, the times you showed up and the times you did not. The version of yourself you were when nobody was watching. I'm going to ask you something that I want you to answer honestly. When that 90-year-old version of you looks back at where you are right now, what do they wish you had done differently? Not with your portfolio, with your time, with your presence, with the people sitting across the table from you right now. I have been around long enough to have sat with people at the end of their lives, not many, but enough. And I've never once heard a person say, I wish I had spent more time at the office. I've never heard a person say, I wish I had driven a nicer car. I have never heard a person say, I wish I had checked the market more often. What I've heard more than once, more than I want to remember, is I wish I had been more present. I wish I had been less afraid. I wish I had told the people I loved that I loved them before it was too late to matter. I wish I had understood sooner that the game was never about the money. The money was just the means. The game was always about what you did with the freedom that money was supposed to buy. And if you spent your whole life chasing the freedom and never stopped to use it, then you did not win the game. You just ran it for a very long time without crossing any finish line that matters here. Is the brutal, honest truth that I want to leave you with. Money solves money problems. And most people in this country with any meaningful savings do not actually have money problems. They have meaning problems. They have purpose problems. They have identity problems. They have relationship problems. And no portfolio allocation in the world fixes those. You fix them by doing the hard, slow, deliberate work of figuring out who you are beyond your job title, of building relationships that can survive the removal of professional context, of designing a life with enough structure to function and enough freedom to breathe, of using your money as a tool for experiences and generosity and genuine living, not as a scoreboard. You cannot stop watching. I chose to keep working, not because I had to, not because I was afraid of the hollow calendar or the identity collapse. I kept working because I found something that I would do for free, something that makes me want to get up in the morning, something that connects me to other people in ways that feel alive, and I believe that is the actual goal. Not retirement from work that does not matter, toward work that does, toward a life so aligned with who you actually are, that the distinction between working and living simply disappears. Let me bring this home. We covered 5 traps today. The identity collapse. You must know who you are without your job title before you leave it. The cognitive withdrawal. You must keep feeding the machine or the machine eats itself. The hollow calendar. You must design your structure deliberately or drift will design it for you. The financial recklessness reversal. You must know what your money is for and what it is not. For the relationship recession, you must invest in people before you need them, or they will not be there when you do. These are not complicated ideas, but executing them requires something that most people are not willing to give, which is honest self-examination. Most people would rather adjust their asset allocation than ask themselves, who am I really, and what do I actually want? Most people would rather buy another financial product than pick up the phone and say, I miss you and I want to be in your life again. The easy path after 55 is to drift, to let the days organize themselves, to tell yourself you're in the rest and let the fog move in. The hard path is to keep building, to treat the last third of your life with the same intentionality you wish you had brought the first two-thirds, the door is open. It has always been open. What you do next is your choice and yours alone. Now stop watching and go do something about it. That's all. Thanks for watching.